We've reached part B, which is creating and populating a library. This consists of creating a new library, entering a reference manually, because you'll still need to reference manually, exporting references from search interfaces, adding PDF files, and using the PDF viewer. Now, the way I'll do this for you, or the way we'll do this together, is that I'll demonstrate the exercises first, then give you some time to do it, and then we'll reconvene for any questions. And the exercises that we'll start with will be exercises 10 and 11. So creating a new library and adding a reference manually. For the adding a reference manually part, there's a table at the bottom of the page with the information that you'll be using yourself. First, I'll demonstrate this and then I'll give you some time. So starting from the Start button, finding EndNote in the list of results of the programs. This, when you first open it, will appear. So in your case, for this exercise, make sure you click on Create a New Library. When you do so, a File Explorer window comes up asking you to name your library and to save your library. So call it something, for example, Practice, and then save it in your C drive. Always save your main working library on your main working computer on your hard drive. Don't save it on a cloud location because it won't work properly and it will corrupt your work. We'll go into that a little bit later as well in more detail. But for now, just know, remember to save it to your hard drive on your main device. In my case, I'm going to just save it on documents on my C drive. And your library will open when you save it and name it somewhere. It'll open and it will roughly look like this. It will have a groups pane, but there won't be any custom groups created under My Groups. It will have a list view section with nothing in it and nothing will be showing in your individual pane. Next, we'll have a look at how to create a reference manually. Remember, this is where you will go to the icon above the list view there. There's an icon with a little plus sign. And if you hover over it, it will say add a new reference to the selected group. So in your all references, click on add a new reference. Step one is to select what kind of reference you've got. But first, I'll just explain a little bit about what the purpose of creating references manually is. In the first place, you still need to be able to know how to create reference manually because sometimes you won't have a record to export from a database. You might have a physical book and no access to an online record to be able to export. And so you'll still need to know how to enter references manually. Now, the basic principle in creating reference manually is roughly that you, or we as users, add the data in, and then EndNote will take care of the formatting at the other end and format it correctly in the Word documents. But EndNote can't do everything for you. There is still a few things that it can't do that you need to control yourself. Plus, there is some conventions and rules that you should be aware of when you do enter the data that will help EndNote correctly export and correctly format the reference. That's one reason. The other reason, as I was mentioning before as well, when you export records into your EndNote library from a library search or from a library database or from Google Scholar, the information that comes in is not always comprehensive and is not always totally correctly formatted. So you still need to be able to check that data coming in and change the data, correctly formatted data, according to the rules of data entry. So for those two reasons. When you click on the icon to open a new reference, the first thing you would do is choose what kind of reference type you've got in front of you. So if you've got a book in front of you, choose book. If you've got a government report in front of you, choose government report, and so forth. And if you have a look at the drop-down menu, you'll see there's quite a lot of options. Not all those options are available in each style though, so you might have to do a little bit of experimenting to see which ones are available. But for a moment, we'll have a look at the journal article example. And I'll follow the information in that table before you, and then give you some time to do it yourself. So for the author field, for example, one might put in an author in the format of personal name, family name. So for example, Teresa Teng, and that would be correct. But you might also, if you prefer, put in an author name in the form family name, comma, space, personal name. For example, Sai Ingrid. And that would also be correct. So if a record came from a database and with names like that, it would be correct as well. As you can see, I'm using a new line for each new author. So clicking enter for each new author. In the case of corporate authors, things like committees or government departments or companies or organizations like Amnesty International, it's necessary to, after the corporate author full name, put in a comma. The comma is there just to tell EndNote that what you've done is put in a corporate author rather than, for example, a personal author. For a year, it's just the year itself. So just the data, not parentheses, even if you're using or happen to be using APA. But for a title, the rule is that you should make sure that the title is there the way it should be expressed in the references. So for example, in a style like APA, the rule is that an article title should be expressed in sentence case. So something like soil types in Australia starts with a capital S and the rest is written like it would be in English. However, the word Australia, for example, is a word that takes a capital letter, and EndNote is not smart enough to figure out that Australia needs a capital letter, and so we have to ourselves control the correct formatting in the title statements. So soil types in Australia. The same is true, or the same is similarly true for journal title. The rule for journal title for APA or Harvard is that it should be expressed in headings case. That is, all the words start with a capital letter, with the exception of things like articles. So a title like Journal of Soil Engineering needs to be controlled by you as the user. The other thing to note about that is that, often rather than typing it in manually, we'll be cutting and pasting from electronic sources. Say, for example, you've got a PDF, then, rather than just typing it in, pasting it in is easier. When you do so, just make sure that you don't also copy and paste in extra spaces or full stops. So something like an extra full stop and a space there, because that would be expressed as well in your end references. Following on, the example of the journal article, for a volume number, it's also just the data, no italics necessary, and it will take care of that. For the issue, same thing, no parentheses needed. And the same thing for the pages as well. 13 or the page range, 13 to 20. There's no PP dot needed for that. EndNote will take care of that. So to summarize, the rule is the data at its simplest, and EndNote will take care of the rest, but there are exceptions. So once you've typed in or copied and pasted in what you want to describe for a new reference, you can click on the top right button save to save it or wherever you want to, and then on the little X to close it. And when you've done so, you'll be able to see your reference in list view and then check how well you've done relative to the preview on the right-hand side in the preview pane. All right, that's the demonstration part. I'll give you a little bit of time to do this yourself now. Exercises 10 and 11, and perhaps about 5 minutes, and then we'll reconvene for any questions before moving on. And if you've got any questions in the meantime, please put them into chat. Thank you. Okay, I hope that worked out for everyone. As you can see in that table, what we've done there is we've got full name, so Tsai Ingrid rather than Tsai I, for example. So EndNote is smart enough to express that if it's needed. Say, for example, your style requires that you've got initials rather than full names, then EndNote will express that in an initial. Now, the rule in terms of what kind of thing you should put in there, what kind of data, is the best rule is make it as comprehensive as the information you've got from the source. So if your record has the full name, then put in the full name, and EndNote will take care of the rest depending on what style you've got. But sometimes it only has the initial, and if that's the case, just use the initial, such as, for example, Tsai, I. Now, one of the things there, and it's written down there as well, I think, is that you could put in the full stop there or not, and EndNote is smart enough to figure that out as well. A few other things there. There's on the next page, a table with other things that you might need to consider about data entry. So all we've done now is a data entry example for the journal article, but there's other things that you'll want to be aware of depending on the reference style that you're using and depending on the reference type that you might be using. So these things may be relevant to you or not, depending on the style that you're going to be using yourself as well, and may be relevant to you or not, depending on the reference type. So, for example, for a book, edition statement, make sure that you type it as it should appear. So EndNote's not smart enough to put in RD at the end. So rather than putting in 3, put in 3rd, that kind of thing. Other information there is the type of medium. Occasionally, there is a reference type in some styles that ask you to put in a medium indicator. For example, in what platform an ebook comes from. It could be a particular name of the database. If that's the case, make sure you put it in, but also the information is there to remind you to check that if you're getting information from a database, to check that if you need a medium, that it's come across with the record, because sometimes it doesn't. With URLs, make sure that it starts with an HTTP. But really, the important thing about URLs is if you're getting a URL from a larger search interface, such as say the library search or Google Scholar, sometimes those URLs will be search statements rather than records, so you might have to correct it. Access date, another one that you might want to check just in case. Some reference types still require that you put in an access date for some sources, so the time that you accessed a particular resource. Most of the time this is not the case, but sometimes it is. Label is a free text field, so if you go down the record of potential fields that are there, there's a label field there. That's just a free text field for you to use if you want to, but really it's the older version of groups, so you probably won't have too much use for it. But it's a way to categorize things, so you could potentially put information in there and then make it viewable in your list view. Research notes, also a free text field for you personally to use. So this is where you could put in notes about the source that you're reading, potentially quotes, things like that, or evaluations of the source. So the idea behind this from the point of view of EndNote is that you could potentially use EndNote not as your references manager only, but also as your way of organizing your literature review. So far, the manual entry and creating the library. We'll move on to the next part, and this is exporting from search interfaces into EndNote. So it's possible to export from all kinds of search tools into your library. And this is one of the places where EndNote can really save you time. I mean, obviously it requires a bit of investment to get used to the software and to learn how to use it. I'll just display a slide. So first of all, to be able to export from a search tool, it's necessary to have your library open. So make sure your library is open whenever you try this. Then beyond that, there is a number of steps that are relatively similar across all the different search tools. So sometimes they do vary a little bit. There may be 6 steps instead of 5 steps. There may be different icons to use. It could be a tick box instead of a folder icon, that kind of thing. But I thought I'd put this slide up because it's a good idea to know roughly what the basic steps are, so that when you do come across the differences, you'll be able to recognize them, the differences as well as the similarities. The example we'll be using is for EBSCOHost. So this is going to be exercise 12, exporting from a subscription database. And for that platform of databases, these are the steps. So first of all, you would need to connect to the database and run a search so that you have some example results up so that you can export them. And then from the set of results, step 1 is select what you want to export. And in EBSCOHost, that is a folder icon to click on next to each result. Step 2, sometimes you'll need to open your pre-selection of results. Not in every database, so this is sometimes different, but in EBSCOHost, you're asked to open your selection to be able to then choose the export option from there. And there's a folder view link that you can access. Then in that set of saved results, there's a number of options, one of which is export, which allows you to export your results into EndNote. Occasionally, in some databases, you'll need to select the particular software option, because EndNote is only one of the softwares that's available out there. So make sure that EndNote is properly selected. And as it happens, in EBSCOHost, it's already properly selected. So in that case, you'd click on Save. Then, depending on your browser, different things will happen. So if you're using Firefox, there'll be a download window in the center of the screen. If you're using Edge, you'll have a bar at the bottom of the screen. If you're using Chrome, you'll have an animation of a download going to the bottom left. Whatever happens for you, make sure you choose Open. Open rather than Save, because Open should automatically import the results into the library that you've last had open. And at that point, you can check your references and organize them. So those are the steps abstractly, and now I'll show you before giving you some time to import them. And then also straight after, show you how to create a group from them, and so that you can do that afterwards as well. I'll just demonstrate exercises 12 and 13, I think. First of all, we'll have a look at EBSCOHost. So there's a link in there for you already in the chat window Quentin's put in to EBSCOHost. Alternatively, if you've got Chrome, you can Google to it, or if you've got the Qt library window open, you could browse down and search to it in the library databases. So Qt, I'll just Google it, or from clicking on that link. You may be asked to authenticate, in which case use your Qt login details, and then you'll get to the platform of the databases, the EBSCOHost platform. So there's a long list there. Choose the first one, so Academic Search Elite, and click on it, just so you've got a smaller set of results and to start somewhere, just by way of example. Click on Academic Search Elite when you get there. So remember, we do need a set of results, so perhaps use to search bone disease. To get a set of results up. I'll just make that a little bit bigger so you can properly see it. I hope it's not too big, but some of you may be working from quite a small screen. So I've got 36,000 results or so. So remember those steps. Step 1 is select the results you want to export to EndNote. So let's presume this is a great set of results that you want to export. Just by way of testing another thing later on, the next exercise after these two exercises, I'd ask you also to do two things. One is click on full text, and the other one is to click on academic journals. And this is just a test, an exercise later on. So this is not really part of the exporting records as such. It's about the success of full text, which is an exercise we'll do after these two. In any case, when you get a set of results, next to each result, select which one you want to export. There's a little folder icon there, and do that for the first 10. So do it for 10, again, to see how successful it is later on. Click on there, you'll see that it opens or becomes a little bit yellow, and you'll also notice perhaps that you've now got a set of results appearing on the right-hand top side with a link to folder view. So that's result 1. Click result 2, 3, 4, I think that's 10. After selecting, step 2 is open your pre-selection. And in EBSCOHost, you can open the pre-selection from the top right over here. There's a link there for folder view. If you click on that, it opens your pre-selection, what you've clicked on to select. And here it is, my folder, articles, 10. So instead of those 30,000, I'm now down back to the 10 that I've actually got selected. It's actually not necessary to select them again in this particular database. Step 1 was select. Step 2, open your pre-selection. Step 3 is find your export option. On the right-hand side of your pre-selection, there's links to print or icons to email and save and want to export. So click on the export option there. We'll open a new screen. Remember, sometimes you need to select which referencing software that you're going to pick, but in this database, it happens to already be correctly pre-selected. And so if you follow those steps, you're asked to just click on Save at this point. Now, depending on which browser you're using, different things will happen. I'm using Chrome at this stage. So what happened was there was a little animation to the bottom left here. So that's where my download is. If you're using Edge, there'll be a bar at the bottom. If you're using Firefox, there'll be a window right in the center of your screen. Whichever you're seeing, make sure that you select Open. So in my case, I click on that little chevron and select Open. EndNote will then, if I open it up, import those references into the library. So that's these references in list view that I had selected, and I can see that they are these different references because if I look at my groups view here, it's got a separate section for imported references as well as all references. So all references includes the one that we created before, and then there's these imported references here. So that's the importing part. Now, at this point, if you would be working yourself at home on your research and not just on how to use EndNote, this might be a good time for you to check whether everything's come across correctly. So, for example, you might click on each result that you've imported and check relative to the preview in the style that you've got, whether it's actually showing the reference the way it should. And if it's not, then make the changes to edit to correct it at this point. So this would be one point where you can control the data that's coming into your reference collection. If you don't do it now, you'll still have lots of data, but you won't have any control of quality over it. So this is a good time to do it. And another option might be to create a group and add them to a group and do it later. I mean, so you could do your research first and then your checking second. Speaking of groups, remember we had groups pane on the left-hand side, and this is exercise 13, creating and populating a group. You can create groups for different purposes at lots of different levels. So there's one way would be to hover with your mouse over the groups pane, just underneath your My Groups, and then right-click, and a little menu comes up with different kinds of options, so different kinds of groups options. The simplest one is just simply create group. And you could then call it something. So in this case, we've got stuff about bone disease, so perhaps bone disease is the title of this particular group. And at the start, it's got no results in it at all. So it's necessary to populate it. And I could do so, for example, from imported references a number of ways. One is to click on the results and then use Control-A to select all my results, and then drag and drop it into that group. That's one way. Slowly selecting it and dragging and dropping it into that group of bone disease until it's populated in there. Another way might be right-clicking and adding the references to the group that I've created, or even use this as the point from which to create a group, to start creating a group. So there's different ways to do that. Just note that what you're doing here when you're creating a group is not moving any references at all, but rather just creating a sub-view. I point out again that the all references at the top has not changed in number. It's still just 11. And so this bone disease is just a subsection of that group. And it's possible to delete that group without deleting any references. On the other hand, if you delete anything from your all references list, it would also be deleted from all of those groups. That's the exporting from search tools and creating a group. I think this will take you a little bit of time. So perhaps 7 minutes or so, and we'll reconvene and I'll re-demonstrate before we move on. Okay, all right, we'll leave it there. I hope that worked out for most folks. What we've done is tried from one database, and what we've done is done an exercise for creating one particular kind of group. But of course, you can export from all kinds of search tools. So there's a number of different exercises there for you to finish and do yourself in your own time. As I was saying before, the steps are very similar across different search tools. They vary just a little bit. And so I hope those instructions are going to be very useful for you. There's one for the library search, the main library search. There's one for Google Scholar as well, for the different types of search tools, in other words. One thing to note about exporting from different search tools is that sometimes you'll be doing it for different reasons. So it's possible to, for example, export results from Google Scholar. And sometimes that's really quick to do, and that's one reason why you might do it. And another thing you might choose to try and do is export from the library search, and that might be something you want to do because there's so much to search from the library search. But there's minuses to searching from mega searches like the library search in Google and Google Scholar, and so our advice would be to export from the native publisher databases. So things like ProQuest, things like Medline, things like EBSCOHost, because the data you get from that is the cleanest and the most comprehensive. And so sometimes Google Scholar or Google Scholar will be okay, but other times it's better to go directly from the database itself. So that's a note about the exporting from search tools. Then about groups. So what we've done is we've created a simple group But it's also possible to create other kinds of groups. So there's exercises there for you to complete and consider in your own time as well. Now, when you start, it might be sufficient to just have groups. But as you develop, you might want to have more control over how you've organized your own references. So the simple group is there, but there's also such a thing as a group set. So that's the higher level one, which you could rename. So different categories of organization, for example, you could call this one, say, for example, thesis, and another one you could call journal article, for example. And there's also different kinds of groups under that. So a simple group is just a simple view, but it's also possible to create a group from groups, which is a subset or a union of different groups that you've selected. And it's also possible to create a smart group, which is a group based on a search set. And essentially that's creating a search of your own library, and then EndNote will auto-populate based on what it finds in your library, a group. So that's a lot of control. So that's exporting in groups. Now what we've done so far is just exporting records. So data for references. But it's also possible to see if EndNote can try and get the full text file as well. And this is what we're looking at the next one. The next two exercises will be exercises 21 and 22. And that's seeing how to download full text files. And then also seeing how the PDF viewer works once you've got some full text files. And I'll demonstrate that first and then give you a little bit of time to complete it for yourselves, and then we'll reconvene for questions. EndNote can try and get the PDFs associated with the record that you've already imported. And it does this by authenticating to our databases with some metadata that we've put in the software. But it's not very successful. It's sometimes very successful and sometimes not very successful. Essentially, the rate of success depends on whether you've got, or whether you're using, or whether you're researching journal articles that are current, that are well described, that have a DOI, essentially, a direct object identifier number associated with it in the record or in the PDF. And if it's not a journal article and it doesn't have a DOI, then the success rate of EndNote trying to extract itself without your activity full text will be a lot less. And sometimes it just varies for other reasons. So if the network is a bit dodgy on a day, then it will be less successful than a little bit later, I've found. So it can really vary. The functionality itself, though, is rather simple. So I'll just show you that, and then I'll show the PDF viewer. First of all, make sure you've got all your references selected, all your 10 references in your groups view. And then in your list view, click on one item to select it, and then click on Control A to select all of them. So this is 20.1. And then 20.2, above the list view, look at one of the icons there, the one that's got a little bit of a looking glass over the top of a document icon. If you hover over it, it says search the web for full text, and click on that. Then, depending on what you've already done so far, a little dialog box comes up, and it may ask you to authenticate if you're not already authenticated. So if you are asked to do so, use your QT details there to log in. Or you may just get a list of results. That's possible too. If you do just get a list of results you've already authenticated, in which case click on the proceed button at the bottom of that dialog box. Either or. So after you've done that, what EndNote tries to do is extract the PDF files to the records that you've already created. And you'll notice that there's some progress happening in the groups pane on the left-hand side when you do so. So there'll be a new group with activity under Find Full Text. And it will show you which one it's finding, which one it's not finding, so which one it's got no success rate at, and sometimes you'll just get a link, a URL link that allows you to go back and download it manually yourself. So in my case here, I've got 7 found and 4 not found. So one of those 4 not found is the one we've made up. So essentially, I got 7 out of 10 of those results. So that's a good result, but it's a good result because we have selected the journal articles right at the start and because we had selected full text. So that's the full text function. Next, now that we have full text files in our library, it's possible to use EndNote as a PDF viewer. Now in the list view, you'll be able to distinguish results which have a PDF by the little paperclip icon that starts appearing next to the results that have the PDF attached. So if you click on one with a PDF, it then becomes possible to open and view the PDF in the individual or from the individual view pane on the right. It'll be there underneath the drop down at the top. And you may remember this from the demonstration. There'll be 2 options for you to use. There's the open option, and the open option is going to use the PDF viewer that's native to EndNote itself. And then depending on what you've got installed on your machine, you may be able to use another software. So I've got Adobe Acrobat selected. Now the benefit of that is that it's got some extra functionality. But we'll just have a look at the native PDF viewer first. So this is what it looks like here. So you can read it, but you can also markup, use markup. There's at the top left of your PDF viewer over here, a little icon next to the search function there. There's the markup annotation function. It's quite small. It's like a little bubble or text bit with an arrow. And if you click on this markup annotation icon, click on it, it makes the functionalities available to add a sticky note, highlight, underline, strike through. So give that a go in the exercise. Try all of them. So highlight, underline, strike through. And to add a sticky note, you click on it first and it places a sticky note where you had your mouse. And then when you click on it, it gives you the availability to add comments in it. And at this point, I'd just remind you that the search function that comes with EndNote allows you to search the record, the text in the PDF, plus any comments that you've added to the PDF. So this is something that you could use to make it searchable as well. So that's the full text in the PDF viewer. And I'll give you a few minutes to play with those 2 exercises and complete them, and then we'll reconvene for any questions. Let's see what else I was going to mention. I was going to mention, so one of the things that is not possible to do with the native viewer, it's limited to those functionalities that you saw. So it's underline, highlight, and so forth. Now, sometimes people will want to mark up as if they're writing on their PDFs. So for that, you would use your native PDF with that kind of functionality, such as Adobe Acrobat. The success rate of importing full text is very variable. So it depends on whether you've got current journal articles with DOIs, and apart from that, success rate is a lot less. So sometimes, depending on your discipline area, it may not be as useful at all as it might be in another discipline area. So that's one thing to note. And so perhaps you would make the choice not to use EndNote for your place to store PDFs. Now have a think a little bit about that. Regardless, it's still going to be variable. The success rate is going to be variable. So I'll just demonstrate how you would add a PDF, and I won't ask everyone to do this because you might not have the PDF ready for it, but this is exercise 22, and then afterwards I'll just demonstrate exercise 23 as well. So we've got a list of references here, 11, but only some of them have references. So for the other ones, you in fact just have to go back to the actual place where you got that record. To summarize, when you don't have the PDF imported, go to the database, download a PDF, and then add the PDF using the attach file icon here. This one, for example, the La Roche one, it's got no paperclip, it's got no PDF view, it's showing in the individual view on the right-hand side. So imagining for the moment that I've already gone to EBSCOHost here to download it locally, then I would click on attach file. It would open a file download, a file explorer window. And I would then browse to the PDF wherever I've downloaded it locally and double click on it to attach it. It doesn't immediately show in the paperclip because it doesn't save automatically there. But if I move to another location, it will auto save, and from that moment on, it's attached with the PDF. You may also be in a situation where you've already got a number of PDFs or a PDF. You can ask EndNote to import the PDFs and then try and create records based on the PDF files. Again, the success rate is very variable. Certainly you can import PDFs and you can import a whole folder of PDFs, but EndNote won't successfully describe them unless you've got, again, journal articles with DOIs. In the other cases, you're going to have to do some manual markup. I'll show you how that would work, and that's exercise 23. To import a PDF or a whole folder of PDFs, go to the top left and under File, go down to Import, and then choose, in this case, File. A little dialog box comes up asking you to find what you want to import. So click on Choose, will open a file explorer allowing you to find what you want to import. In this case, a PDF I've already got. And an import option drop down is there as well, because you can import all kinds of things into EndNote. So make sure that when you do this, that you select the correct import option for PDF and then click on Import. And EndNote will then import it into your little database, your little library. And that's this one here, the imported reference. If I click on it in the individual view, there's at the bottom the preview under that chevron. And the preview in this case is looking pretty good in the APA style. It's looking pretty good though, because I've got a journal article with a DOI. It won't always do that. In fact, if you don't have a DOI, it won't automatically create that record for you very well at all. And you'd have to do it yourself. And the way you would do it would be to import and then copy paste perhaps from your PDF into your edit record, and that's how you would then work around creating your own record. So, you know, author, title, all the things that you need for whatever reference that you're trying to describe.